this poetic terms list. It says we'll go over these terms as we discuss the poems in Zoom class. Please make notes as you participate in class, and use a dictionary if you miss any, or an online poetic terms dictionary. Okay, so the first term is free verse, and free verse describes the two poems that we read on Monday. They are not rhymed and they don't have a set meter. Okay, so free verse poems do not have rhyme or a set meter. That doesn't mean they don't have patterns in them. It just means that they don't have rhyme and meter. Okay, does that make sense? All right. Imagist poetry. Imagist poetry is poetry by a group of poets who all agreed that the most important thing in poetry was the image, the picture. So it's poetry that paints a picture with words. Poetry that paints a picture with words. Okay, blank verse is our next term. Blank verse, you might need to ask for spelling on this, is unrhymed, iambic pentameter. Unrhymed iambic pentameter. You don't know what iambic pentameter is yet. I'm going to tell you that. That means that it has 10 syllables in every line, and those syllables go in a pattern like a heartbeat. Unstressed, stressed. Bump, 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 bump. And that's the rhythm of blank verse. Whose woods these are, I think I know, ba-bump, right? Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and saw I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could. So it's going to sound like that all the way through, okay? So blank verse is 10 syllables in each line, unrhymed. Somebody tell me what a rhyme is. This goes all the way back to preschool. Tell me what a rhyme is. You know what a rhyme is. Yes, okay, so the words that have the same ending sound, right? And in a poem, those rhymes are at the end of a line of poetry, usually, okay? So rat and cat rhyme. Love and dove rhyme. They share the of sound, O-V-E. Meter is a rhythm, and it usually counts the number of syllables, and it works with stressed and unstressed syllables. Like Swanberg has the stress at the beginning, right? And you don't want to put the stress on the emphasis on the wrong syllable, right? So it thinks about where the stresses in words naturally occur and tries to match them with a pattern. So it's a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. That's meter, a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. A sonnet is a 14-line poem, a 14-line poem in iambic pentameter. Again, that's that 10-syllable line that sounds like a heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. Right? So a sonnet is a 14-line poem in iambic pentameter. Does anybody know how to spell iambic, or are you all just guessing politely and quietly? That's correct. Wow, good spelling. I-A-M-B-I-C, iambic. Pentameter is pent, like pentagon, and meter, pentameter, like pentagon, but pentameter. Okay, that means it's 5 of those iambs, but each iamb has 2 syllables in it. Okay, I'm gonna make you write one when we're done. Not really, that would be cruel. If you want to write me a sonnet, I will totally give you a good grade for that. All right, let's see. Refrain. A refrain is a part of a poem that repeats. So if you've ever read any Edgar Allan Poe poetry, he's got that, quote the raven nevermore. That's a famous refrain. So it's something that comes back. In a song, it's the part of the song that repeats, right? So we have refrains in songs and poetry. So it's the part of the poem that repeats. The speaker is who's talking the poem or who's saying the poem. So if the poem says I or something like that, we call that person the speaker. If it says I told him no, then we call that person the speaker. If it were a short story, we'd call this person the narrator, right? But in poetry, we don't. We call it the speaker. If anybody talks in the poem, we call it the speaker. Okay? So it's kind of like the narrator of a poem, we call the speaker. What's the author? You guys know this one. Somebody tell me this one. Yeah, that's who wrote the poem. So William Carlos Williams wrote the Red Wheelbarrow, so he's the author. Anais Nin wrote the one for your diagnostic, so he's the author, right? They sometimes are the speaker and sometimes not. It depends. Okay. A line of poetry is how the poem is broken up. Notice a lot of it is not the same as sentences. When we read prose, which is short stories and essays and things like that, we read in sentences. But in poems, we break it up by line. And it's important to notice that it's broken up by line because sometimes the whole poem is one sentence, right? Sometimes a sentence will span a couple of lines, and if you stop at the end of the line with your brain and you don't continue, it breaks up the sentence in a way where it doesn't make sense anymore. So you have to make sure that you're paying attention to sentences that have been broken up into multiple lines. And don't let the end of the line make your brain think it's the end of the sentence, because it might not be. And we'll take a look at that today to make sure you're understanding how poetry can break a sentence up into lines, okay? Sometimes those lines are set by how long the poet's allowed to have it be if they're using a meter. Oops, it's 10 syllables, time for the next line. And sometimes it's in free verse, it's where the poet wants to put it, right? Okay, a stanza is like a poetry paragraph. That's a group of lines that go together. So it's a poetry paragraph, a group of lines that go together. There are different names for different kinds of stanzas, and I won't make you learn all of those, but there are tercets. That's a set of 3 lines that go together. A couplet is when 2 lines go together. There's all sorts of different kinds of stanzas, but for our class, just understand it as that unit of lines that go together. And then if there's 4, then you've got quatrains and you just got boom, boom, boom. First stanza, second stanza is like little poetry paragraphs. A syllable is what? Somebody tell me what a syllable is. I think you know this one also from previous schooling. What's a syllable? Brooks, how many syllables in the word syllable? 3. Okay, so it's the chunks of a word is a syllable, the pieces of a word. All right, imagery. Anybody have a guess? We've talked about images poetry. Can you tell me what you think imagery might be? Yeah, the picture that the poet is trying to give you. And even poems that aren't imagist poems use imagery. They try to get you to see something, right? So imagery is the picture that the poet is writing with their words. They're writing a picture. Okay. A metaphor is a direct comparison. My life is a tree with roots in the ground and leaves in the air. Okay, a direct comparison. Has everybody got metaphor? It's a direct comparison. Okay. A symbol or something that's symbolic is one thing that stands for a bigger idea. So let's say a poet keeps talking about water. What could water symbolize? What could water stand for a bigger idea? Life, new beginning, cleaning, right? Or purity, right? Sustenance, movement, maybe, we don't know, right? So, but when you read it, you realize that it stands for something else. We see symbols all the time and we get used to them. If you see a red octagon as you're driving, what should you do? Stop, thank you. So, and you know that you've gotten used to it. And we do have some very common symbols, and sometimes poets use some creative symbols. But no matter what, we get suspicious that maybe they don't mean exactly what it means. Okay, a simile, it looks like smile, but if you're dyslexic, and it really looks like smile if you're dyslexic, but it's simile, S-I-M-I-L-E. And simile is a comparison using like or as. Okay, and that's and it uses that in the comparison, not just those words are in the sentence, but it's like I'm as full as a tick, right? That's a simile. I'm full as a tick, right? Or you might say he's like a dog with a bone, right? And that's a simile, and that compares the person's behavior to the behavior of a dog with a bone, right? So that's a simile. These are all examples of figurative language. Figurative language is language that has a meaning above and beyond, and maybe even different from the words that are on the page. So we have idioms, things like it's raining cats and dogs. It's not literally raining cats and dogs. It's raining cats and dogs means it's raining really hard. So any kind of figurative language, whether it's a simile or a metaphor, is language that has additional meaning from the words on the page. Okay? So figurative language has additional meaning to the words on the page. Literal language means it literally exactly means what the words say. And people get this wrong a lot. People very often will say things like, she's literally as big as a house. And you're like, no, nobody's literally as big as a house. Like, maybe Clifford the dog, but he was fictional. So, you want to make sure you're not, I had an employer once who got a sandwich she didn't like, and she said it was literally the worst thing that had ever happened to her. I was like, man, I wish my life were that good, that a sandwich I don't like is literally the worst thing that's ever happened to me. But I've had way worse stuff happen. So be careful of literally. But saying figuratively doesn't have the same impact. If you say, wow, she is figuratively as big as a house, it doesn't, it doesn't have the same impact. So, you know, that's why people misuse it, but let's not. Literal means it really truly means what it says. Figurative is anything that means something additional to those words. Theme. A theme is, and this is really important because we're going to be working with theme as we read these poetries. A theme is an idea that runs through a whole work. So let's say you're reading a whole novel and the whole idea of jealousy just keeps coming up over and over and over again with different characters and in different situations. And that theme keeps coming up. So it's an idea that runs through an entire work. And in our paper, we're going to be tracing a theme that appears in several different poems. And we're going to be thinking about the themes that these authors raise for us across a couple of different poems. Okay, so it's just an idea that runs through the whole piece. All right, I'm going to stop the recording now. If you do need to go back over these terms, you can go back over. Before I stop recording though, does anybody have a question about any of the terms that we have here? No, we skipped it. Okay, thank you. Okay, ballad form is it has 4-line stanzas. So you have stanzas that have 4 lines in each. They usually have a rhyme scheme, and that rhyme scheme is usually A, B, or A, B, C, B, where it, you know, and it's really typical for a song. A lot of songs are ballads. A lot of poems are ballads. So if you see those 4-line stanzas and you see that alternating rhyme scheme, whose woods these are, I think I know, his house is in the village though, you're going to start seeing those. And that's a really common form of poem. Ballads very often tell a story as well, but for right now, I just want you to start recognizing those 4-line stanzas with those alternating rhyming words. So it'll have a rhyme and then a different word and then a rhyme and then a different word in those 4-line stanzas. Good. Any other questions about these terms before I stop recording? Thank you for that. Didn't mean to skip it. One more minute to lodge any questions before I stop recording.